Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and along with me is my esteemed colleague, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing very well, Dr. Dave. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. We want to thank our viewers and listeners for joining us on another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, the personal, professional, and career development podcast. For those of you that are viewing, you will see that we have a guest speaker. For those of you who are listening, you now know that we have a guest speaker. We have Dianna Booher here with us. How are you doing today, Dr. Dianna Booher?
I'm doing just great. There's no snow. It's just a perfect day out here, so I'm doing
Awesome.
great.
Awesome. Why don't you, if you could, just take a couple minutes and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, primarily, I'm an author. I coach other people who want to get their message out there, but I have written most predominantly about communication. I consider myself a communication specialist and started with exactly two Fortune 500 companies. They passed my name around, and that's how I got into it, really basing my books and my keynotes on experiences I had in working in those initial companies. And they all had a problem. But basically, the way I started is there was a big lead into the local ABC news in Dallas. And I had about 3 minutes because I had a book coming out. And the next morning, I didn't even have an assistant. The next morning, I had a Houston Chronicle story run. And by noon, I had 32 calls from corporations saying, can you come out and help us do what you were talking about? And really, most of the work has been based on just hearing comments. I know when I got that first book idea, which was on business writing, and since then I've gone to making presentations, executive presence, running effective meetings. Communication's a big umbrella. But when I first started out, I was focused on that. And I really started because I was talking to the vice president of engineering at Exxon. And he said, engineers can't write. I spend all my time sending their reports back, asking them to do it again. And so that was sort of the solution to that problem. And I've done 50 books at this point under my own name.
Wow.
Not self-published. They're published with major publishers, but each one of them is based on some problem that a client had me to come in and they talked to me. I got to talk to their supervisors, the managers, the executives, and find out really the root of those problems, and then make sure that the solutions that I could bring to them really worked and collect data of that they worked. And so then that, of course, led me to the next book and the next book. And so I just consider myself pretty much an author and a speaker when a corporation asked me to come in, when a client asked me to come in for a big conference or convention, etc. And I now that I've sold my training company, I had a training company for about 35 years, but now that I've sold that company, I started when I was 10. Like just
That's what we thought.
Sounds
Yeah.
about right. Yeah.
that once I sold that company, now I have been primarily coaching other entrepreneurs, other professionals who either want to move up in their own organization and somebody's giving them the feedback, they're just not, quote, ready. And a lot of times they don't know what created that plateau, but they can't get to the executive level. So I'm either coaching them on that executive presence or helping entrepreneurs who need to publicize their company, their service, their product, a consultant that wants to get known, a speaker that wants to get known in the world and needs to sell their book to a major publisher to establish credibility. Then the other part of my business is helping to coach them through that process.
Wow, that is amazing.
That is a lot.
I wish my book lineup looked like a quarter of what yours is. And
You're not busy at all.
no. just
and you have to do something, sitting on those airplanes on the runway when you can't take off, can't land, you're in a foreign city, sitting there in the hotel room. And I did write several books on the road because that's the best time. Nobody knows where you are, so they can't interrupt you.
Right. Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
and I love the
impressive.
fact that you're actually taking case studies and turning them into books. I think that's an awesome thing.
Yeah, I thought that was a great idea as well. Wow.
Yeah, I don't like to write in theory. And by that, I mean,
Mm.
I don't like to do a lot of research and then theorize what might work if somebody tries it, because that's pretty expensive to an organization
Yeah.
that somebody's experimenting on their people and their time, and they could be wasting a lot of time to get no results.
Right.
So I want to always make sure that when I'm go in as a consultant, what I'm teaching them really does work. And going back to sometimes people say, well, how do you do that? In writing, it's pretty easy because you can ask people to keep logs of how long it takes to write the average audit report or the average loan document to solicit a loan, etc. And then we take them through the process of writing. And then we ask them again a month later, and better yet, when our clients ask them 1 month or 3 months later, how much time have you saved? How many rewrites do you now have to do, etc.
Okay.
We have hard data, and we've gone back to clients and every 3 to 5 years collected that data again, so it stays current. And then, of course, in presentations, your best test, have you learned to get a point across persuasively, is the results you see.
Right.
You know, I remember the situation. I was working with a large oil company, and the guy who was my contact, who happened to be in the HR area, he was doing training for the executive team. And he said,
Dianna, I'm going to
"Can't
interrupt
get
you
our
for
budget."
just a
Sure.
brief second.
Uh-huh.
I'm loving the conversation. I just realized I forgot to announce the topic for the show today, and that's creating executive presence. So to put things into context for everyone, just want to put that out there. So this is about creating executive presence. So pardon me for interrupting, but please continue on.
Sure. And part of that executive presence is what you put on the page. You know, if you say something in a meeting, people can walk out and probably a week later, they maybe remember the essence of what you said, but not exactly how well you said it, how articulate you were. They may just remember the idea, or not even that, unfortunately. But when you write something, it is there for everybody to see. It is a picture of your thinking. And so, as I started to say earlier, I had an executive who was in charge of all of the professional development of the executive team. And he said, our parent company is getting ready to just can us. We can't get the budget we wanted. That's been the case the last couple of years. And we've sent up email after email, and we can't get a response. In fact, no response. And so I guess that's our response. And he said, after I went through this training process and your 5-step process for learning to write an effective, persuasive document, he said, I immediately got a response from the CEO, said, why haven't you told me about that? And it was an oil company who was trying to communicate we're going to have major explosions. We're going to have major spills into the ocean. We need to do repair to our pipelines. And he was just astounded that nobody's responding. But once he was able to get that message across effectively in a very concise document, the CEO actually looked at it and as I said, his response was, why haven't you told me about this earlier? And of course, my contact didn't say, well, I've written you 7 emails on this. That wouldn't have been much good for his career.
Right.
But when you put your face on the page, or you participate in a podcast, you're in a meeting, either on Zoom or face-to-face, all of those interactions stacked end to end is how someone perceives you as executive material. They either say, they lack a little polish. A lot of times they don't know to call it presence, personal presence, executive presence. Many times when a senior leader will call and say, I want to send this person to you. We're willing to pay for it as a company, but they need help. They don't often just say executive presence. Most of the time their comment is, I can't really put my finger on it. They're excellent in their daily job. They bring in business, or they win more cases or whatever. If they're in sales, they're one of our top salespeople. But then they always add this line, but there's just something that I can't put my finger on that they need before we feel comfortable in moving them to the executive level. And so that's what I assess and get at.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot throughout my career about many people, executive level managers, senior managers, leadership directors. And, we've met some folks where it's like, wow, they're so good, but there's that one piece. What is it? It's like it's right there, but you're not quite sure what it is. I'd love to learn more about creating. Yeah, and I'd love to learn more.
That's the hard part, is saying what causes that. They often know themselves what that weak spot is, and they've had feedback, whether it's just body language feedback or actual words from their boss or a peer who's trying to help them. they understand that there's something missing, but they don't often know how to analyze it well enough to do a specific thing to change that impression.
Mhm.
So I guess my question is, so you do an initial assessment of that individual. So what are you looking for when you're doing that then?
Well, several things. Before I go in on such a consulting assignment, I will ask the person who's going to be coached to give me 3 to 5 people who see them frequently in interactions, in meetings, on Zoom, on the phone, etc. And I like to at least have one person that reports to them, one person that is above them, and then peers. So I like to get the whole gamut of people and get their input. And I obviously don't want to embarrass my coachee. So I will ask questions like, what do you think they do exceptionally well? And then if you were their career coach, what improvements would you encourage them to make? And you would be surprised how much people feel obligated actually to give input because they want to help that person. It benefits the whole team. And it's not done in a negative way, but I will take all of that and then I do my own assessment. I have documents to assess, but often I will just do the assessment when they don't realize I'm doing the assessment. In the chit chat when I arrive on site, if I'm coming to them, if I'm going to them, sometimes they come to me, but I'll have them meet different people in the audience, in my office, and ask them, can I bring you some coffee or whatever? But just in those really informal discussions, I am immediately assessing how do they come across? How do other people perceive them? How do other people how do they respond to people who approach them and introduce themselves, et cetera? There's just a lot that you can pick up in about a 15-minute observation. At other times, which I think is really the best, that person who's going to be coached will have me to come in and observe them, just follow them around for a day or two. And they often just introduce you as their coach and they don't say what. It's become a status symbol these days to have a coach.
Right.
Everybody has a coach. So if they are worth enough to have a coach and consider that as a status symbol, then they just introduce me as my coach. I sit in on a meeting and I ask them on that day that I'm there to please have a meeting with staff, have a meeting with peers, try to have a meeting or calls with their boss. And I just sit there and make notes. And then at the end, I'm able to give them some summary comments, some analysis of things I've seen in every interaction, some things that were unique to one interaction that did not happen at all in the other interactions. And you'd be surprised, and people often when they get that feedback will go, oh, wow, how did you pick that up? Yes, that's my attitude toward that guy, but I didn't know that you knew that. How did you know that? So they're often really surprised at what someone can observe through the way they express themselves, through their what they talk about, what they don't talk about, when they grow silent, their body language. All of that says volumes. And then so I give them a report, and here's some specific things that you could change. And that's the magic, is being able to tell them specifically concrete things, concrete actions, concrete do's and don't do's to change or improve the perception of other people.
Have you had the experience once you tell people, hey, I want to observe you, do you I'm sure it's probably happened before, but do people tend to get kind of out of character because they know they're being watched?
I think probably at the beginning, the first 5 minutes, and then they forget that I'm sitting in the back of the room. Actually, I remember one particular engagement, again, another Fortune 10 company. This senior vice president had 17 junior vice presidents reporting to him all around the world. And so they were all in. They don't come in but about once a year. So all of them were in. And he had asked me to observe that meeting. And his problem, he had already heard through 360, was that they did not feel valued. They did not feel that they had input, that everything he said was command, and that he didn't welcome opinions. And so he brought that to me. He said, I don't know why people feel that way, but I know they do. So would you observe this meeting and tell me? And of course, he was just right in character. As I said, 10 minutes later, he didn't remember that I was sitting behind him in the back of the room. But it was so apparent because his body language did everything to say, move on. I don't want to listen to you. You're
wow.
taking my
Okay.
time.
Wow.
I mean, he would lean back in the seat and prop his hand back and,
Wow.
prop his chin up and start shaking his head when they started talking. All of
Wow.
this body language that said, I don't want your input. You're wasting our
Right.
time. I don't want to hear you. And he had no clue. He was totally unaware that he did all those. And when I was showing him some of the body language, he said, really? Really did I do that?
Wow.
Totally unaware. So I know they lose consciousness of the fact that I'm there observing them.
Okay.
So for the audience to put things in further perspective, what is your definition of creating executive presence? What does that look like, that executive presence piece in creating?
Well, I really put the characteristics, traits, attributes, etc., into four, I'll call them buckets, four categories. When I ask audiences, when I speak on this for a keynote, I'll ask audiences for their definition. I said, I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I want you as quickly as you can in groups of 3 or 5 or whatever, put together your list of characteristics that would convey to you somebody has executive presence. Think about politicians, think about TV actors, think about CEOs, anybody that you've been around. And they will call out anywhere from 30 to 40 things. They don't lack for descriptions. Yet, when I hear those, and I've heard those for decades, they can be divided into those 4 buckets. It's what people see, and that might mean your movement. People see how you move. They see your posture. They see gestures. They see confidence. Confidence comes through in how you walk. They see your dress, etc. So what people see, and then how you think when something extemporaneously occurs. There's alarm goes off, somebody gets injured, somebody brings up a startling statement or comment in a meeting. When you've had no time to prepare, how well do they analyze quickly and express themselves persuasively to a point of view? That's the second thing. The third thing is how they talk. And by talk, I don't mean the content, that goes under thinking, but their sentence patterns, their grammar, the language choices, the way they express things, whether they ramble or they focus, all of that, voice quality, all of that is part of how you talk. And then the last bucket I call all else. And by that, I mean their action, their behavior. And that can't be assessed immediately because it involves things like competence, your track record, your reputation, your honesty, humor. And you don't see all those in every interaction. And in fact, your values and your character have been developed over years and years and years. So that only comes out over time. But what I can teach and what people can learn or the things to change and improve are the things that fall into those first three categories: how you look, how you talk, and how you think. Those can be changed and improved very quickly. And of course, nobody ever masters all of those things. I mean, I've been studying communication for decades, and I don't claim to have mastered all of communication. But I view it, the executive presence, when you ask me to define that, I view it as a continuum. And, here is really a novice that looks, like a deer in the headlights when you see them. And this is someone who's very composed, very trained. You would say, gee, they've had a lot of coaching to be in the media. Most of us fall somewhere on that continuum. And my goal in coaching, of course, is to move them further along by giving them very specific things that they can pay attention to.
Okay.
Wow, that's impressive how you can do that. I mean, that I was looking away, taking notes on and thinking, wow, this makes so much sense. And then I started thinking real quick, what am I doing? What am I not doing? What are we doing? What are we not doing?
And most of us are totally unaware of our body language unless we've studied it, unless that's our field. We people who ramble before they get to the point, that's a major complaint, by the way, of executives. They say, Mike needs all the help he can get because he's excellent engineer, he's an excellent accountant, or systems analyst. But when you ask him a question, he goes around the world, or she goes around the world to get to the point.
Mm.
People don't see those deeper things. I mean, they've probably gotten some feedback about dress. They've probably gotten feedback even about body language, shaking hands, giving a firm handshake, not rocking when they present, they are maybe standing too rigid. I don't know what the weakness might be, but it's likely that they've been given some feedback there, but not to the depth that they can change it, because those habits have been formed over many years. If you've been in the business world 10 years, you've given a lot of presentations, you've written a lot of emails, and you've probably not had anybody sit down and say, this is the impression of you personally that I get in this email, or you and how you think based on what you just presented. So they may get that comment, but not how to correct it.
Mm. Wow. There's a lot more that goes into this than I even ever considered or imagined. So this is definitely an eye opener for me and a learning for me.
Let me give you a concrete example from one client I'm thinking about, just to let you know how critical it can be when somebody jumps to the wrong conclusion. I was called into, again, a very large organization. They had hired, I was called in by the CEO. They had hired a woman to come in, first female they'd ever had. And this was about 10 years ago. I still remember it. First female that ever had to promote at the executive vice president level in technical area, in the engineering area. And the CEO called and he said, I think we've made a mistake. I thought we vetted well, but I think we've made a mistake. She's been here 6 months, and I don't think she has any thoughts of her own. I think she's just going to, we thought she should get rid of some of her staff that's not performing. She hasn't done that. She had made hiring decision. So before we, cut bait and lose our investment in bringing her aboard, and we paid a big recruitment fee to get her here, we just come out and work with it. And so I, again, did the process, talking with the staff who report to them, talking to peers, what's your impression in a meeting? What are her strengths? What, if you were coaching, what would be her improvements, etc. And their comment was, she doesn't know how to think. I thought, how can you assess that?
Okay.
And come to find out, when I talked to these 3 other executive vice presidents who had agreed to bring her in, they had thought that she would fire this particular guy immediately, week 1. And she says, that's not how I make decisions. The way I make decisions is to gather facts first. And then she gave them all, she showed me all of this data that she had collected, all of these interviews she had done. And she said, I want to make my own assessment. I don't want someone else giving me the input if this person's going to be on my team. So I went back, how are these people coming up with the idea that she doesn't think? I can understand they think, okay, it's been 6 months, she should have fired the guy. But they said, well, she just shakes her head all the time. She sits in a meeting and nods. And I had to make those 3 executive vice presidents aware that many times when people, whether they agree or not, they nod their head just to say, I'm listening. I'm with you. I hear that point. I accept that point. But they were interpreting that she's just going along. She's just agreeing with everything we say. Therefore, she has no thoughts of her own.
Wow.
Again, it's a misinterpretation of somebody's body language. So there needed to be education on both sides. And she did work out. She's been there a long time now. But those are the kind of things that can really trip you up. And they're small things, but even small things make a huge difference in certain contexts and to certain people. I've even had a CEO of a large financial company, you would immediately recognize the name, who said that at this level, or the vice president that we want here in this position, he needs to entertain clients. And that means he's out on a yacht for a week or 2 with a client couple. They go to parties. Basically, that's their life, entertaining clients. And then they bring in these big accounts. And they said, this guy's grammar is holding him back. It is horrendous. Can you improve? Can you pick out the worst grammatical errors he makes and improve them? Now, to many people, they would say that's a minor thing. If his thinking is good, if he has a great personality, but to that CEO, he was careless. It was a class thing to him, and it was careless that conveyed no education, no formal education. So they're just all kind of perceptions that people have, and you don't know what they are about yourself until you're able to assess and to figure out what it is that creates that impression, and then what can you do to change it. But it is critical.
I really like what you said about that in the previous example, where it wasn't just that new executive, it was also the current executives that needed to learn or unlearn.
And that was where I was going to go. Yeah. Because that was my thought is, that's their interpretation or that's their impression of what they expect or think. So that was kind of what I was thinking of. All these suggestions people are making to that individual, maybe based on their own opinion or their own biases on how they think that person should be. So I'm glad you did bring that up.
Yeah,
that sometimes it does take education from that other part of the equation as well. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I've been giving you some examples of the body language thing, but we make an impression in writing as well. One of the earlier assignments I had, this CEO asked me he wanted to send writing samples from, it was four different vice presidents. And he said, I'm going to have my assistant send you several documents they've written down to their staff. I want my assistant will send you several they've written to me, and then some that they've just reports and they've copied their peers. And I want you to assess their management style. And I said, whoa, this was earlier in my career. I said, whoa, I'm not sure you could do that just from emails. And he said, well, all right, I'll take my chances. I understand you're giving me a caveat here, but I would like for you to do that. So I took those documents, read through it, and then I wrote him a one-page report on each person. I said, these are the traits as a manager that I picked up in these documents. And he called me and he says, you have nailed it. This is exactly what I thought, that I wanted something concrete. Now, would you go meet with those guys and tell them? And I went, oh, that's not a very pleasant part of this, because I pushback from them, because obviously I pointed out good things, but I'd also pointed out some traits of a manager that weren't so good. And I remember this one particular person who kept saying, you're exactly right. That staff member that I write to and that you've analyzed and drawn things and made notes on, I don't like the guy. I don't like him at all. But how could you pick that up? And so I began to point out word choices. And he said, no, that's right. I only use those word choices with that one person, not with anyone else. And sometimes I had remembered talking about this guy being very dominating, sort of domineering and commanding people to do something rather than asking, would they? And he said, how did you put that up? And the CEO was telling me there was a totally different style that he wrote to peers and up as opposed to writing down. And it was just subtle things like his subordinate would write and ask a question for information, and he would just ignore that question. Maybe there was 3 questions in the email. He would respond to the one that he thought was significant and let the others go. Well, that's a careless attitude. That's not being responsive. If somebody asks the question, they probably have a need to know. So there's subtle ways that we communicate attitude, whether we're writing, presenting, speaking in a meeting, whatever. There are many ways that we communicate how we feel or don't feel about our job, about promotions, about clients, just about a project.
Right. Absolutely.
Wow.
So we've got about 2 minutes left or so. What are your this has gone by way faster. I mean, I'm just I'm taking notes. I'm like leaning in, trying to absorb this like a sponge, because there's only 30 minutes. What are your kind of parting thoughts or nuggets that you want to leave with our viewers and listeners?
Probably, if I could focus on 2 things, it would be to learn how to synthesize information. People who have executive presence can get input from a lot of different places, a lot of different documents, a lot of different meetings, but it takes really skill to pull all this down into 1 or 2 good sentences, maybe one or two good paragraphs to summarize, synthesize the essence of something. Maybe it took 30 minutes for someone to say it, but if you can't summarize it in a sentence or two, you really didn't get it. And then the second thing that I would focus on is to encourage people to take a point of view, pick a lane. Frequently, you hear this from lawyers a lot, and I do coach a lot of lawyers. They say, well, I've researched the situation, I've looked at past cases, and there are pros and cons for whether we go forward with the lawsuit or not. Here are all the pros, here are all the cons. And I said, okay, so what's your conclusion? What's your recommendation? Well, I'm not making a recommendation. That wasn't what they hired me to do. They just hired me to get it. And I'm saying, no. They probably can get the pros and cons back and forth. They are wanting your expert opinion. So just like we do, if you go to a lawyer, you don't want him to say, well, on one hand this and on one hand that. And on this.
Yeah.
When you walk out, you want an opinion. Should I do this or not? If you go to your accountant, you want an opinion. Can I deduct this or not?
Right.
And so when you stand up to do a presentation or even in a meeting or a phone call, when your boss has asked you, your client has asked you, what's the ideal situation? What's the best solution? What is your opinion? What's your recommendation? Pick a point. Now, the reason people go back and tell them about all their work is they're trying to cover their bases. I understand that tendency, that temptation, because they think, I want you to know I've done a thorough analysis. I've done a lot of research. But what you want to start off with is, this is my point. Here's what I'm recommending. This is what I think we should do and why we should do it and how we should do it. And then you circle back and say, now, I did look at other options. I looked at option B, C, and D, but I've discarded those for whatever reasons. That will be a persuasive structure. So again, rather than meandering through all of the information, pick a lane.
Yeah.
I really like that. Wow.
That was awesome, Dianna. I mean, when you were talking about this, it reminded me so much of the research and dissertation process. You have your abstract, your intro, your literature review, your analysis, the results of the analysis, and then what's the conclusion? What is your recommendation? And it's like, I'm imagining people leaving bits and pieces out or starting and rearranging the order.
Yes, but if you think about that, professors had you use that order because they were grading your thought process as much as your conclusion. They already knew your topic better than you do. And so they were wanting to see how you got to that conclusion. Business readers, no, that's not their goal. They're saying, we pay you to do all that thinking and research. Just give me the bottom line, save my time. Make sure it's right, make sure it's clear if I question you, but cut to the chase. Awesome. Different reason, different reader, different knowledge.
Yeah. Dianna, that was, wow. I mean, my mind is blown.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in a good way, Joe, what are your final thoughts?
Again, that was action packed with a lot of valuable information on how people can, be an executive presence. I mean, I like that final comment where you said pick a side, because I have found myself going into some, trying to explain the process and not finally getting to it until people have lost interest. So I like that approach. I think that will help me and kind of minimize and eliminate some of that doubt that people have, or start to ask the question. So I really appreciate that tip. As well as everything else you said. So it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. And like Dave said, time did fly by it. And I think we both were just on the edge of our seat, like, okay, what's next? Because this was very informative. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you have anything that you wanted to leave with our viewers and listeners so far as the information, how to reach out and contact you? I think you said that there was a book related to this topic.
Yes, I do have a book called Creating Personal Presence. Yes, and many on writing and communication in general. One is Communicate with Confidence, but they can find all of those on my website at BooherResearch.com. It's just like my name. I always say it's Boo Her, except I hope it's not. 6 letters, BOOHER, BooherResearch.com.
Awesome. We'll be sure to have that in the description. And if there's any other information that you want in the description, please feel free to forward it to us and we'll make sure it gets in there.
Okay, sure.
with that, we'd like to thank our viewers and listeners and our audience for joining us on another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, the personal, professional, and career development podcast. We hope you've gotten something out of this. I find it almost hard to believe if you couldn't, because this was a great one. And if you have any suggestions, let us know. If you want to get in contact with Dianna, her information will be in the description, like I mentioned. And with that, we want you to keep on being your not so ordinary you.